What would you do if the very person meant to protect your neighborhood was the one stealing from it, and the only way to expose her was with a trap no one could forget? Where are my packages going? That was the question running through Preston Mallory's head as he stood on the porch of his new townhouse, staring at the empty spot where a box should have been. It wasn't just a late delivery. The tracking number said delivered. He'd even gotten the picture. There it was. A brown cardboard box sitting neatly against the front door at 3:17 p.m. Yet now, at 5:42 p.m., it was gone. This wasn't the first time either. In the 3 short weeks since Preston had moved into the quiet suburban cul-de-sac on the edge of Plano, Texas 3 packages had vanished the same way. He could almost accept it happening once, maybe twice, but 3 times. That was no coincidence. That was a problem. At first, he figured it was just random porch pirates. He'd read enough neighborhood apps and local Facebook rants to know it happened all the time. Still, something about it didn't sit right with him. His new neighborhood had gated access, cameras at both entrances, and retirees who treated the place like a watchtower. Strangers didn't just wander in and out unnoticed. So how could someone waltz up to his door in broad daylight and take a box without anyone saying a word? Preston bent down and ran his hand along the welcome mat, as if the package might magically reappear if he checked close enough. He shook his head. Whoever was doing this wasn't sloppy. They were bold. That evening, he walked across the street to chat with Owen Driscoll, a man in his 60s who always seemed to be watering his lawn or sweeping his driveway. Preston figured if anyone had seen something, it'd be Owen. "Hey Owen, quick question for you," Preston said, hands in his pockets. "You notice anybody hanging around here earlier today? UPS dropped off a box for me, but it's gone now." Owen leaned on his rake, giving Preston a look like he already knew where this was going. "You're not the first one. Couple of folks down the block mentioned the same thing. Word is," he lowered his voice even though no one else was around, "word is Geraldine's been seen walking off with boxers." Preston frowned. "Geraldine, the HOA president." Owen replied, pointing to the 2-story unit with a stone facade and perfectly manicured rose bushes. "Lives right there. She's, how do I put this, ... particular. Keeps tabs on everyone. Says it's for the good of the community, but a few people think she helps herself to packages now and then." Preston let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. "You're telling me the HOA president is stealing deliveries?" "Wouldn't shock me," Owen said, shrugging. "She's got her hand in everything else." That night, Preston sat in his living room, scrolling through his phone, the TV on mute in the background. T's gut told him Owen might be right. Earlier that week, he'd caught Geraldine standing in his yard, clipboard in hand, staring at the paint on his shutters. When he'd stepped outside to ask what she was doing, Sue gave him a lecture about color shades and HOA guidelines as if she owned the property herself. Preston wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but something about her eyes sharp. Assessing, always watching made the possibility feel real. Could the same woman who fined a neighbor for leaving a trash bin out too long also be bold enough to steal boxes right off porches? He leaned back on the couch and muttered to himself, "If it is her, I'm going to find out." And from that moment on, he knew this wasn't just about missing packages anymore. It was about principle. He'd worked hard for the life he was building here, and he wasn't about to let someone, HOA president or not, decide what he could or couldn't have. But the thing about going up against someone like Geraldine Caffrey was simple. Once you challenged her authority, there was no going back. But before Preston could figure out how to prove it, he had to understand the kind of person Geraldine really was. Preston Mallory hadn't moved to Plano on a whim. The decision came after years of cramped apartments, unreliable landlords, and constant noise bleeding through paper-thin walls. He had spent his late 30s grinding at a tech job in Dallas, pulling long hours and saving every penny, determined to finally own something that felt permanent. When he found the townhouse, it seemed like the answer. A safe neighborhood, good schools nearby, even though he didn't have kids, and a community that promised order. At first, everything felt like a breath of fresh air. The streets curved neatly, lined with trimmed hedges and uniform mailboxes. People waved as they passed, and for the first time in years, Preston felt like he belonged somewhere. He could park his car without fighting for space. He could take his evening jog without dodging traffic. He thought, "This is what I've been working for." He moved in on a Saturday morning, greeted by a few neighbors who came by with casual welcomes. A middle-aged woman named Irene Callahan stopped to say hello, telling him she lived 2 units down and taught 2nd grade. Another, Victor Rowe, shook his hand firmly and joked that new homeowners had to supply barbecue for the whole block. Preston laughed, appreciating the warmth. But even during those first days, he noticed something different about the woman across the street. Geraldine Caffrey didn't say hello. Instead, she lingered on her porch with her arms folded, studying him as movers carried his furniture inside. When Preston waved, she gave a stiff nod and scribbled something on the clipboard she always seemed to carry. At the time, he brushed it off as nothing more than neighborly curiosity. Inside, Preston unpacked slowly, setting up the essentials: his couch, his desk, his kitchenware. On the second night, he ordered a set of pots and pans online, excited to finally cook proper meals in his new place. But when the delivery alert came the next day, the box was nowhere to be found. He figured the driver must have dropped it off at the wrong door. Mistakes happen. The second time, though, the pit formed in his stomach. This time, it was a box of new running shoes. The tracking photo showed them on his porch, gone within hours. He called the shipping company, filed a claim, and hoped for the best. By the third time, the frustration had settled deep. Preston found himself walking the sidewalks at dusk, glancing at porches, searching for any clue. That was when he began to notice how much power Geraldine carried in the neighborhood. She wasn't just the president of the HOA. She was the HOA. Residents mentioned her name constantly, the way she dictated lawn heights, the way she sent emails about which holiday decorations were acceptable, the way she fined a retired couple for planting tomatoes instead of approved shrubs. "She's not all bad," Irene Callahan told him one evening as they chatted in front of their driveways. "She does keep things looking nice, but she can go too far." Preston tilted his head. "Too far how?" Irene hesitated, glancing toward Geraldine's house. "Let's just say she doesn't think the rules apply to her the same way they do to everyone else." Asterisk, that vague answer stuck with him. The more Preston looked around, the more he saw signs of Geraldine's control. Her roses always bloomed perfectly, her siding always spotless, her driveway polished like it was on display. But beneath the perfection, there was something off. A few neighbors seemed nervous to even mention her name, as if saying the wrong thing might bring consequences. Still, Preston tried to stay positive. He decorated his living room with framed photos of hiking trips in Colorado, bought a grill for weekend cookouts, and invited a couple of coworkers over to see the new place. He wanted this chapter of his life to feel good. Yet every time he thought about the missing packages, that optimism dimmed. He couldn't shake the image of Geraldine standing with her clipboard, watching. He started paying attention to small details: the way she timed her walks around the block, the way she seemed to know exactly when delivery trucks came through, the way she sometimes parked her SUV halfway down the street instead of in her own driveway, as if trying to blend in. One afternoon, Preston spotted her bending over a neighbor's porch, fussing with a box of gardening supplies. She stood up quickly when she realized he was watching. She smiled thinly, waved her pen, and said, just making sure it wasn't left out in the open too long. "We have to protect our community, Mr. Mallory." Preston forced a polite smile back. But inside, the suspicion grew heavier. Protect the community, or protect herself? He didn't have proof yet. Just whispers, instincts, and a string of vanished boxes. But the more he learned about Geraldine, the clearer it became. She was not the kind of neighbor who would let things slide. And she was not someone who liked being challenged. But if Preston was right about her, he was already on her radar. And that meant things were only going to get more complicated. If you asked 10 people on Preston's block about Geraldine Caffrey, you'd likely get 10 different answers. But they'd all carry the same nervous undertone. To some, she was the woman who kept the neighborhood spotless, always reminding people of deadlines for pressure washing or repainting shutters. To others, she was a bully with a pen and clipboard, writing fines with a zeal that felt personal. Preston learned more about her over cups of coffee with neighbors and casual chats at the mailbox. Geraldine had lived in the community for over a decade, and in that time, she had carved out an image of authority. She was in her early 60s with sharp features and a wardrobe full of pressed blouses and loafers. Everything about her screamed control, from the way she corrected people when they mispronounced her last name, to how she dictated where holiday lights should be hung. One Saturday morning, Preston saw her in action. He was trimming his hedges. When Geraldine walked briskly down the street, clipboard in hand, stopping at a townhouse 3 doors down. A young couple, Alex and Marissa Blanton, had just moved in with their toddler. Geraldine didn't knock politely. She rapped on the door 3 times, firm enough to echo. When Marissa answered, Geraldine wasted no time. "Your trash cans are still at the curb," she said, her tone clipped. According to the HOA bylaws, they must be brought in by 8 a.m. sharp. "This is your first warning," Marissa stammered. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll bring them in right now." "See that you do," Geraldine replied, jotting something down on her clipboard before striding off. Preston felt his jaw tighten. The whole scene lasted less than a minute, but it told him everything he needed to know. Geraldine enjoyed the power. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was asserting dominance. Later that day, Preston ran into Alex in the parking lot. Alex shook his head. "She's unbelievable, man. We've been here a week, and already she's threatening us with fines. I told Marissa not to worry, but it's stressful, you know?" Preston nodded. "She's intense. Has she ever done anything worse than that?" Alex lowered his voice. "Between you and me, some folks say she takes things. Packages, mostly. But nobody wants to push it because she controls the fines. You cross her, and suddenly you're paying for things you didn't even know were violations." The rumor was spreading, and Preston could feel the pieces sliding into place. Still, he didn't want to jump to conclusions without seeing something himself. That chance came sooner than expected. One evening, he was out on his porch when the FedEx truck pulled up. The driver placed a medium-sized box at his door. Preston stayed put, sipping his coffee, pretending to scroll on his phone. 15 minutes later, Geraldine strolled past, clipboard tucked under her arm. She didn't look at him directly, but she slowed down just enough to glance at the package. "Evening, Mr. Mallory," she said. "Evening," Preston replied, forcing a friendly tone. Her eyes flicked to the box again. "Be careful with deliveries. We've had issues with theft in this community. Best not to leave things unattended." With that, she walked away, her loafers clicking against the pavement. Preston's grip tightened on his coffee cup. There was no theft problem, except the one possibly standing in front of him. The next morning, he decided to test her indirectly. He spoke with Irene Callahan again, this time with a little more urgency. "Irene, can I ask you something straight up? Do you think Geraldine takes people's packages?" Irene hesitated, then sighed. "I can't prove anything, but I've lost a few. And once I saw her carrying a box into her garage that I'm sure wasn't hers. When I asked, she said she was keeping it safe until the owner came to claim it. Funny thing is, I never got mine back. Preston exhaled slowly. So you think she's been doing this for a while? Let's just say she knows how to cover her tracks. Irene answered. By now, Preston's suspicions had hardened into conviction. He was dealing with more than a nosy HOA president. Geraldine had found a way to use her authority as a shield, making it hard for anyone to accuse her without fear of retaliation. But Preston wasn't wired to let things slide. He'd worked too hard for this life, too hard to finally own a place of his own, only to let someone like Geraldine treat him like a pawn in her little kingdom. He was done playing polite. But before he could confront her, he had to try the official route: complaints, reports, and a fair shot at justice. The more Preston thought about it, the more it knotted him. He wasn't the type to accuse without proof, but every conversation with neighbors, every glance at Geraldine's smug expression when she mentioned package theft, pushed him closer to certainty. He decided to start small. Document everything. That week, Preston set up a motion-activated camera above his front door. Nothing fancy, just a mid-range model he bought online, the kind you could set up with an app. When the package arrived, he felt a twinge of excitement. Finally, he'd have eyes on his porch 24/7. But on the second day, as if mocking his effort, another delivery vanished. Preston pulled up the footage immediately, heart pounding. He watched the playback, the UPS driver placing a box by the door at 11:06 a.m., then leaving. For the next hour, nothing. Just cars passing and a neighbor's cat darting across the walkway. By 12:17 p.m., the box was gone. No one on camera. Preston leaned back in his chair, muttering, "That's impossible." He rewound, watched again. Still nothing. Somehow, whoever was taking the packages knew how to avoid being seen. Either that or they had a key to his porch camera's blind spots. That evening, he took his frustration to Irene Callahan. "Did your camera catch anything?" she asked, adjusting her tote bag on her shoulder as they stood by the row of mailboxes. "Nothing," Preston said. "It's like the thing just vanished. I don't get it." Irene gave a wry smile. "Geraldine knows every inch of this neighborhood. If she's doing it, she probably knows where cameras don't point." Preston frowned. "So what? She's been stealing for years, and nobody stopped her." "People have tried," Irene said softly. One guy down the street confronted her. A few years back, next thing he knew, he had 3 fines in 1 month: paint, lawn length, and mailbox color. He ended up moving. Preston's stomach twisted. That was the power Geraldine held. Even suspicion came with a price. Still, he wanted something solid, so he expanded his plan. He asked Victor Rowe, the neighbor who joked about barbecue, if he'd seen anything. Victor scratched his beard and said, "Funny you mention it. Couple months ago, I had a new set of golf clubs shipped. Never arrived. Tracking said delivered. Few weeks later, I spotted Geraldine's grandson swinging a 9-iron in her backyard. Same brand, same bag. You tell me?" Preston's eyebrows shot up. "Did you say anything?" Victor chuckled dryly. "Sure," I asked her about it at the HOA meeting. She looked me dead in the eye and said she'd bought them secondhand. What am I supposed to do? Call her a liar in front of 30 people? No thanks. The puzzle pieces were stacking higher. Every story pointed in the same direction. Geraldine wasn't just strict. She was entitled, and no one dared push back. That night, Preston sat at his kitchen table, staring at the glow of his laptop screen. He pulled up the HOA bylaws, scrolling line after line of rigid language about paint colors, landscaping, and fines. What struck him most was how much power the president held: enforcement authority, discretion over penalties, and even the ability to approve or deny appeals. In other words, Geraldine was judge, jury, and executioner in this little cul-de-sac kingdom. He closed the laptop and rubbed his temples. So if I call her out, she'll bury me in fines. And if I stay quiet, she keeps stealing. The next morning, fate gave him another clue. Preston was heading out for work when he saw a FedEx truck parked 2 doors down. The driver set a large package on the Blantons' porch. 10 minutes later, Geraldine emerged from her garage, clipboard in hand. She walked casually up the street. Slowed as she neared the box, glanced around, then bent down. From where he stood, Preston couldn't see exactly what she did. But by the time she walked back toward her house, the box was gone. He clenched his fists, debating whether to shout. Across the street. Instead, he pulled out his phone and texted Marissa. "Hey, did you get a delivery just now?" Her reply came back 2 minutes later. "Nope, nothing yet." Why? Preston stared at the screen. His suspicion had crossed into certainty. That night, he sat on his porch with Irene, the two of them sipping tea as the summer air cooled. "I saw her today," Preston said flatly. Irene turned her head. "With a package." "Yup, took it straight off the Blantons' porch." Walked away like it was hers. Irene blew out a slow breath. "Then you know what you're up against?" "She won't admit it. And if you accuse her, she'll make your life miserable." Preston's jaw tightened. Maybe. But I can't let her keep doing it. Somebody has to stop her. But going through the official channels was the only reasonable first step. And Preston was about to learn just how useless those channels could be. Asterisk. Preston believed in giving people the chance to do things the right way before he resorted to traps or public shaming. He wanted to see if the system worked, even if that system was the HOA Geraldine ruled like a fiefdom. So the next morning, he sat down at his dining table with his laptop and drafted a formal complaint. He included dates, tracking numbers, and a description of the missing packages. He kept his tone professional, no accusations. Just a request for the HOA to investigate. When he hit send, a copy of the email went not only to Geraldine, but to the HOA's general account. He expected it might take a few days to get a response. Instead, an email pinged his inbox within an hour. "Mr. Mallory," it read, "we appreciate your concern regarding deliveries. Unfortunately, the HOA is not responsible for individual property security. It is the homeowner's duty to safeguard personal packages. We recommend installing cameras and being present for deliveries whenever possible. Regards, G. Caffrey, HOA President." Asterisk. Preston read it twice, then laughed bitterly. He already had cameras, and how was he supposed to be present for every delivery when he worked a full-time job? The reply wasn't an answer, it was a dismissal. That evening, he decided to speak to Geraldine in person. He caught her on her driveway as she was clipping dead blooms from her rose bushes, wearing gardening gloves and that same clipboard tucked under her arm. "Evening, Miss Caffrey," he began. Carefully, she looked up, her expression polite but guarded. "Mr. Mallory, what can I do for you?" "I sent an email earlier today about my packages." "Yes," she said briskly. "And as I explained, the HOA has no liability. Theft is a police matter." Preston held her gaze. "So you're saying if someone is stealing from multiple houses in this neighborhood, you don't see that as your concern?" Geraldine's lips tightened. "What I'm saying is that the HOA is not a security service. If you believe a crime has been committed, you are free to contact law enforcement. Meanwhile, I would remind you to ensure your shrubs remain within the height restrictions outlined in our bylaws." Preston's chest burned. "With respect, Miss Caffrey, this isn't about my shrubs. People are losing property. I think you know that." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but her voice remained even. I would be careful about making insinuations without evidence, Mr. Mallory. False accusations against neighbors can themselves be considered a violation of our community standards. It was a warning, cloaked in formality. Preston forced a smile, though his jaw ached. I'm not making accusations. I'm asking for accountability. Surely that's in everyone's interest. Geraldine turned back to her roses. Enjoy your evening. That was the end of the conversation. Preston stormed back inside, pacing his living room. She hadn't denied anything. She hadn't even acted surprised. Instead, she'd deflected and thrown in a threat. He knew then that going through official HOA channels was pointless. She controlled them. The next day, he called the non-emergency police line. An officer came by, took a report, and listened patiently as Preston explained the string of missing packages. The officer nodded, scribbling notes. Problem is, the officer said finally, without footage or a witness, we can't pin it on anyone. We'll add it to our records, but porch theft cases are hard to prosecute unless we catch someone in the act. Preston pressed, even if multiple neighbors say the same person is involved. Even then, the officer replied, we need concrete proof. My advice, set up a decoy package. Sometimes that works. Preston raised an eyebrow. A decoy? The officer shrugged. Something you don't mind losing. Could even be empty. Thieves don't usually check before grabbing. Catch it on camera, then we've got something to go on. That idea stuck with him. He thanked the officer and closed the door, his mind racing. Later, that week, at the monthly HOA meeting in the community center, Preston sat near the back as Geraldine ran through agenda items with her usual clipped authority. She lectured about landscaping violations, parking rules, and dues payments. Not once did she mention the rash of missing packages. When a resident timidly asked if security cameras could be added at the entrances, Geraldine dismissed it as unnecessary expenditure. Preston's patience wore thin. He raised his hand. Miss Caffrey, shouldn't we at least address the theft issue? Several of us have lost deliveries. The room grew quiet. Geraldine's eyes found his. As I've explained, theft is not within HOA jurisdiction. If you have personal concerns, I suggest you contact the appropriate authorities. A murmur rippled through the residents. Some looked at Preston with sympathy, others with discomfort. But no one spoke up. Geraldine moved briskly on to the next topic, shutting down the discussion as if it had never happened. Preston sat back, his fists clenched beneath the table. That was it. No more complaints. No more polite requests. She wasn't going to help. Because she was the problem. If he wanted justice, he'd have to make it himself. But before he could act, he needed a plan. And the officer's advice about a decoy package gave him exactly the idea he was looking for. Preston sat at his kitchen table late into the night, the glow from his laptop reflecting off half-empty coffee mugs. Preston didn't wait for the meeting. To end, he stood, the legs of his chair scraping loudly in the stunned silence. He walked to the front, took the remote from a bewildered Geraldine, and connected his phone to the projector. The video played on the large screen for all to see. Geraldine, in high definition, snatching the decoy box from his porch. Her face, sharp and greedy, was unmistakable. A collective gasp filled the room. He turned to her. This isn't about a package, Geraldine. It's about you. The clipboard clattered to the floor. Her authority shattered in that instant, replaced by a pale, stunned silence. The room erupted into a chorus of angry voices, neighbors finally speaking their truth as the police led her. Away, Preston stood on the steps of the community center. Owen gave him a solemn nod. Irene placed a hand on his shoulder. No one said a word, but the quiet solidarity was louder than any applause. The trap had sprung. The neighborhood was finally truly his home.